Chapter 7. "It will drive me mad if it goes on like this," muttered Durtal, sitting at his desk. He glanced once more through all the letters the woman had sent him in the last week. She was an indefatigable correspondent who did not give him time to draw breath after one epistle before another. "Sapristi," he swore to himself. "Let's take stock of the way things stand." After my admittedly rather ungracious reply to her first note, she wrote back, by return of post, the following. "Monsieur, this is a letter of adieu. Should I be so weak as to write any more, they will become as dull and tedious as this life I lead. Anyway, have I not already had the best of you? Your nervous reply to my letter, for example, which, just for a moment, jarred me from my state of lethargy. Like you, monsieur, I know only too well that nothing changes, and that our surest pleasures are only to be found in dreams. Thus, despite my frantic desire to meet you, I am of the same mind as you in fearing that such an experience would be a source of mutual regrets, and one to which we ought not voluntarily expose ourselves. ... What really proves the utter futility of this exordium is the way the missive ends. Should the fantastical notion to write back take hold of you, you may safely address your letters to Mademoiselle H. Mobel, Poste Restante, Rue Lettre. I shall collect my mail from the Rue Lettre post office next Monday. If you prefer to let matters rest as they are, which would cause me considerable hurt, please tell me so honestly." In response to which I was simple-minded enough to compose an epistle as equivocal as the first, self-pitying and forward at the same time. There could be no doubt that she got the message all right, my apparent reluctance being only a camouflage for a certain furtive suggestiveness. This is proved by her third letter. "Never accuse yourself, monsieur," I suppress a more tender epitaph which rises to my lips, "of being incapable of providing me with consolation. Weary and repelled as we are with everything around us, let us sometimes permit our souls to speak to each other in a low voice, so low it is a veritable whisper, as I speak to you tonight, because, from now on, my thoughts will ever be with you." 4 pages of this drivel, he says, turning the pages, and it gets worse. "Tonight, my unknown friend, a quick word only. I have had a dreadful day. My nerves are on edge. They cry out in revolt against the 101 petty annoyances they are made to suffer every day. The slamming of a door, the sound of vulgar voices or those with a disagreeable pitch rising from the street below. Whole hours can flit by in which I am so overwhelmed that even if the house were to burn down, I would be incapable of stirring. Should I really be sending you my comical list of grievances? How tragic is it not to have the gift of capturing one's sadness in brilliant prose, to be incapable of turning it into literary or musical interludes of the most lachrymose variety. Under such conditions, the best thing is to say nothing. I bid you a silent good night. I am still tormented, as I have been from the start, by my need to know you. Yet I dread to approach this stream too closely, lest I should destroy it even as I reach out to touch it. As you yourself wrote the other day, poor us. So wretched and poor, in fact, that our timorous souls are terrified of at least reality, incapable of believing that the feelings of affection which assuage us can endure meeting the very person who gave rise to them. Though the reasoning is eloquent, yet must I confess to you, no, nothing. Guess what it is if you can. Forgive me for the banality of this letter, or rather, read between the lines, and perhaps you will find a little bit of my heart and understand some of the many things I have left unsaid. What a foolish, self-centered letter. Who would ever suspect that my sole thought in writing it was of you? So far so good. At least this woman has captured my curiosity, and what peculiar ink, he thought, examining the thin, myrtle green, almost pale writing. With his fingernail he detached some flakes of face powder, perfumed with heliotrope, clinging to the side. Undoubtedly a blonde, he deduced, examining the tint. Brunettes tend to go for a darker shade, such as Rachel. Everything had been going so smoothly until this point, but then, inspired by some mad impulse or another, I had to go and spoil it. I wrote her an even more roundabout, even more insistent letter, trying to lure her into the abyss I ended up falling in myself. And this was her reply. What should I do? I neither wish to meet you, nor can I annihilate my overwhelming desire to see you. Last night, despite myself, I murmured your name which was burning on my lips. My husband, though an admirer of your work, appeared to feel my preoccupation was somewhat humiliating for himself, as well he might, for I am totally obsessed by your books. Just reading them sends unbearable shivers through my entire body. A common friend of ours, why should I not tell you that we know each other, if that is what having met socially means? One of your friends, if you prefer, came up and said that he admired you tremendously. I was in such a sorry state that I don't know what I would have done had it not been for the unwitting assistance of somebody who mentioned, at that moment, the name of some grotesque individual that I can never think of without laughing. Adieu. You are right. I tell myself that I will never write to you again, and I immediately do the very opposite. Though this can never happen in reality without hurting us both. I am your very own. When I wrote an inflammatory letter back in reply, her maid rushed over here with this response. If only I were not so dreadfully afraid, and admit it, you are just as afraid as I am, I would come flying to you. No, you cannot hear the 1,000 conversations with which my soul pesters yours. Believe me, there have been moments in my life when, for hours at a time, a sort of madness seemed to seize hold of me. Judge for yourself. I spent the whole of last night furiously calling for you. I wept with exasperation. This morning, my husband came into the room. I had bloodshot eyes. I began to laugh like a madwoman, and when I eventually managed to speak normally again, I said, "What would you think of a person who, questioned as to his profession, replied, 'I am a bedroom succubus'?" "Ah, my dear," he said to me, "I think you are very ill." "Much worse than you can imagine," I replied. "What would we talk about, my dear companion in distress, given your own mental state, if I did come to see you? Your letter has left me completely unnerved. The brutality with which you analyse your sickness makes my body rejoice, but it alienates my soul a little. Ah, if only our dreams could come true. Just say the word, any word, but let me hear from your lips. You needn't be afraid of your letters falling into hands other than mine." "This is getting serious," concluded Durtal, folding up the letter. "It seems the woman is married to a man who knows me. What a bother. Who on earth could it be, though?" He tried in vain to pass in review all the soirees he used to attend. He couldn't think of a single woman who would fit the letters he had received. And who could that mutual friend be? I haven't any friends, except her me. I better try and figure out whom he has been seeing recently. Given he's a doctor, though, he must meet scores of people. How could I explain it to him? If I told him how it all started, he'd only laugh, and he'd certainly come up with an explanation that would ruin everything for me. And Durtal became angry, for within him some incomprehensible was happening. He yearned for this unknown woman, was positively besotted with her. He who had renounced carnal relations years ago, he who, when the stable door of his sick senses opened, was happy to drive the stinking herd clamouring to get in towards the abattoir where their sinful heads might be split upon by the butcher girls of love. He, of all people, was starting to believe, contrary to all good sense, that with a woman as passionate as this one seemed to be, he might experience quasi-superhuman sensations, new spasms of delightful relief. And he imagined her as his own fantasies dictated. Blonde, firmer flesh, lithe, feline, melancholy and half frantic. And this picture of her brought about such a state of nervous tension in him that he ground his teeth. For the last week, surrounded by solitude in which he lived, he had dreamed of the day and night incapable of doing any work, even reading, because this woman's image interposed itself between the pages. He strove to devise the foulest nightmares. He imagined how she would look when she was ill, let himself be transported by the most abominable hallucinations, but this technique which has proved successful in the past, when he desired a woman he could not possibly possess, utterly failed him. He just could not imagine this fair unknown doing something as mundane as arranging the laundry. He could not visualize her except as rebellious and melancholy, burning with passion, her eyes kindling his desire, inflaming him with her pale hands. It was almost miraculous, this Indian summer suddenly bursting out in his autumnal body, a spiritual resurrection. Worn out, exhausted without any real desire, tranquil, untouched by crises, almost impotent, or rather completely uninterested in sex for months at a time, he was suddenly reborn, as if flogged into life in the void by the foolish mystery surrounding some letters. "I've had enough," he shouted, banging his fist on the table. He grabbed his hat and went out, slamming the door behind him. "Ideal woman be damned!" And he rushed over to visit a prostitute he knew in the Latin Quarter. "I've been absent for so long," he murmured as he hurried down the street. "No wonder I'm starting to go funny in the head." The woman was home, and the act was excruciating. She was a well-built brunette with a welcoming smile, lively eyes and wolf-like teeth. An expert in the art of prostitution, she could drain a client to the marrow, grind his lungs to dust, and, with a few adroit movements of her tongue, demolish his loins. Never had he so execrated the flesh. Never had he felt such repugnance, such weariness as when he left that room. He strolled haphazardly down the Rue Soufflot, still haunted by the image of that fair unknown, more irritating, more tenacious than ever. Now I begin to understand the fear of the succubus. I must try some bromo exorcism. Tonight I'll take a gram of bromide of potassium. That will dull my senses. But he knew that the physical aspect was only a subsidiary issue. The real trouble was his peculiar state of mind. The physical aspect was merely a consequence of the mental. There was something else wrong with him besides his sex drive. That explosion of his senses, on this occasion, his internal impetus towards something as yet still unformulated. This sudden plunge into uncharted waters, which was proving so rewarding on the artistic level, his need to soar above the humdrum routine of daily life, was being deflected in the direction of a woman. "That is why my ideas are so unsettled," he noted to himself. "It is the result of all those precious books on the occult, all that mumbo-jumbo veiled in ecclesiastical or diabolical imagery. And he says, quite right about the arduous nature of the studies to which he had confined himself. The sudden efflorescence of an altogether unconscious mysticism, which had lain fallow until that moment, was now encouraging him to go off, totally ill-prepared as he was, in the quest of new worlds, in search of new pains and pleasures. As he walked along, he recapitulated to himself everything he knew about the woman. She was married, blonde, fairly well off, because she had a separate bedroom and kept a maid. She lived somewhere in the neighbourhood, because she went to the Rue Lettre post office for her mail, and her first name, supposing that the initial which preceded the name Mobile was in fact the same as her own, must be Henriette, Hortense, Honorine, Herbertine, or Helene. What else? She must frequent the Society of Artists, since she had met him at some soiree or other, and it was years since he had set foot in a bourgeois drawing-room. She was some kind of a morbid Catholic. The word succubus, quite unknown to the profane, proved it, and that was all. Then there was that the husband of hers, as gullible as he may be, he must nevertheless suspect that something was going on between them, since, by her own confession, she was not particularly dexterous at concealing whichever particular obsession haunted her. Damn! I shouldn't have let myself get involved. Like her, I started out by writing a couple of sulphurous letters, seasoned with a powder of buprestis and cantharides, in my case more or less as a joke. Now I find I have let myself become quite hysterical. We have taken turns to fan the smouldering embers, which are now blazing hot. How can it turn out anything but badly if we explain to each other how this happened? On the basis of those passionate epistles she keeps sending me. She must be pretty much in the same state as I am. What should I do? Keep pacing up and down in the dark? No. Better to bring matters to a head. Have a look at her. If she's pretty, I'll sleep with her. At least I shall get her out of my hair that way. What if, for once, I write to her frankly, if I fix a rendezvous? He looked about him. Without knowing how he had got there, he found himself in the Jardin des Plantes. He got his bearings and went to find a cafe which he remembered was on the side facing the quay. He tried to control his emotions and composed a letter which was both ardent and decisive, but the pen shook in his fingers. He wrote at a gallop, confessed that he regretted not having consented at the outset to the meeting she had proposed, and, attempting to check himself, declared, "We must see each other. Just think of the harm we are doing ourselves, raising each other's expectations to fever pitch. There is a remedy at hand, my poor darling. I implore you to make use of it." He must indicate a meeting place. There he hesitated. "Let's have a think about this," he said to himself. "I don't want her turning up at my place. That's far too dangerous. The best thing to do would be, under the pretext of offering her a glass of port and a biscuit, to take her to L'Avenue's, which is a hotel as well as a cafe. I can reserve a room. It's less sordid that way than doing it in a private dining room or going to one of those hotels where you can rent rooms by the hour. On that basis, we'd better not make it the corner of the Rue de la Chasse, but the waiting room of the Gare Montparnasse, which is often quite empty." "Right, that's done." He gummed the flap of the envelope and felt a kind of relief. I was forgetting. "Garçon, the button de Paris." He searched for the name Mobile, wondering if there was a variant spelling. Of course, it was hardly likely that she would have mail sent to her poste restante under her own name, but she seemed so unworldly, so imprudent, that anything was possible. He might easily have met a Mademoiselle Mobile without having realized. He found a Maubert and a Maubec, but no Mobile. "Not that that proves anything," he said, closing the directory. He went out and dropped the letter into the box. The unknown factor in all of this is the husband, he reflected. Then again, I do not intend to deprive him of his wife's company for very long. He thought about going home, but he realized that he would do no work, that alone he would relapse into his fantasy world. What if I went to see me? Yes, today is his consultation day, that's an idea. He quickened his pace, arrived in the Rue Madame, and rang the ground floor bell. The housekeeper opened the door. "Why, Monsieur Durtal, he has gone out, but he will be back soon. Would you like to wait?" "Are you sure he's coming straight back?" "Yes, in fact, he should already be back," she said, poking the fire. As soon as she had retired, Durtal sat down, but becoming quickly bored, he went over and began browsing among the books which, like his own, jostled for place on the shelves along the walls. "Desharmies really has some curious items," he murmured, opening a particular ancient volume. "Here's one that fits my case perfectly, despite the fact that it was written a couple of centuries ago. Manuel Exorcis Morum. Good God! It's a Platine. And what does it suggest? This manual on the treatment of the possessed. It would seem mostly to be comprised of rather strange spells. Here are some for energuments, and for the bewitched. Here are some more against love philters and against the plague, against spells cast on food. There are some even to prevent butter and milk from going off. I suppose the devil had a finger in every pie in the good old days. What is this?" He held in his hand 2 little volumes with crimson edges, bound in fawn-coloured calf. He opened them and read the title. L'Anatomie de la Messe by Pierre du Moulin, dated Geneva, 1624. This looks interesting. He warmed his feet on the fire, skimming through one of the volumes with the tip of his finger. It's actually rather good. On the page which he was reading, there was a discussion of the priesthood. The author advanced that none might exercise the functions of priest if he were not sound in body, or if any of his limbs had been amputated, and Raising the question whether a man who had been castrated could be ordained, he answered that this was not possible, unless such a man carries upon him, reduced to a powder, the members which are wanting. A proviso was added to the effect that Cardinal Tollet did not accept this adjudication, though it was one which had been universally adopted. Durtal, amused, continued reading. Now, Dumoulin was debating with himself the point whether priests guilty of concupiscence should be interdicted. This time he cited the woeful gloss of Canon Maximenius, who, in his Distinction 81 sighs, it is commonly said that none ought to be deprived of his charge for fornication, for few can be found who are exempt from this vice. What? You here? Said D'Hermy, entering. What are you reading? Anatomie de la Messe? A dreadful work, intended for Protestants. Oh, my friend, I'm just about at the end of my tether. What animals people are! And like a man with a great weight on his chest, he unburdened himself. I have just come from a consultation with a group of men of the kind referred to in magazines as princes of science. For more than 15 minutes, I was subject to the most contradictory opinions. On one point, however, they all agreed. My patient was a lost cause. In the end, they reached some sort of agreement and began, quite needlessly, to torture the poor wretch by prescribing a course of fumigations. You should have seen their faces when I timidly remarked that it would be more humane to send for a confessor and ease the dying man's pain by morphine injections. They near as damn it called me a hireling of the church to my face. So much for modern science. Everybody is busy discovering new diseases or reinventing old ones which have been forgotten, trumpeting some patent remedy or another, and yet a state of total ignorance prevails. Not that it matters much. You might as well remain ignorant, since the pharmacological side is getting so complicated that no doctor can be sure of having his prescriptions made up twice in the same way. Let me give you an example. At present, syrup of white poppy, the diacodia of the old pharmacopoeia, has been abolished. It is now manufactured using laudanum and sugarcane. Not the same thing. Not at all the same thing. We've got to the stage that we no longer prescribe specific medicines with specific doses. We rely on off-the-peg remedies instead, the ones whose advertisements are plastered over the inside page of all magazines. It's a real hit-and-miss form of consultation, a democratic medicine. One cure fits all. Utterly stupid. There's no denying it. The old therapeutics based on experience was superior to this. At least it used to be conceded that remedies ingested in the shape of pills, powders and pellets were unreliable, and that cures should be preferably prescribed in liquid form. And now every physician has to be a specialist too. Oculists treat only the eyes, and in order to effect a cure will administer without a cam what is a poison to the rest of the body. How many people's healths have been ruined forever with their pilocarpine? Others treat only skin complaints, suppressing the symptoms of eczema in old people who, as soon as they are proclaimed well, suddenly find themselves incapable of looking after themselves or dangerous lunatics. There is no longer any professional solidarity. Each group attacks the other as it sees fit. Everything is completely out of control. My respectable colleagues are utterly at sea, mesmerized by one proprietary medication after another, none of which they know how to use. Take antipyrine, for example. This is one of the very few active ingredients that the chemists have come up with in a long time. Well, how many doctors are aware of that? Applied by means of a compress of cold, iodized Bondono spring water, antipyrine combats that supposedly incurable disease, cancer. It may seem incredible, but I assure you that it is true. Do you really believe, said Durtal, that the physicians of olden times were better versed in the art of healing. Yes, because they knew by heart the effects of all the natural remedies. Obviously, when old Paret advocated medicine bags, ordering his patients carry around with them powdered medicaments in a little sack of varying shape depending on which organ was diseased, some sort of cap for the head, a bagpipe for the stomach, an ox tongue for the spleen, his results cannot have been spectacular. His claim to have cured gastraglia by the application of a powder made up of red roses, coral and mastic, wormwood and mint, aniseed and nutmeg does not stand serious scrutiny, but he had other regimens, and he often effected a cure, because he knew all about the simples, a knowledge which has now been lost. The medical profession still shrugs its shoulders with the name of Ambrose Paret mentioned, but then the medical profession used to pour scorn on the alchemists' belief that gold had a curative effect, none of which prevents it from being used in the form of salts and fillings as an alternative treatment today. Concentrated gold arsenate is employed in the cure of anemia in women, gold chloride in the treatment of syphilis, cyanide of gold for menstrual discharge and scrofula, and sodium and gold chloride in the case of persistent ulcers. Now, no, I assure you, sometimes it becomes quite repugnant to be a physician. Despite the fact that I hold a doctorate in science and have worked in hospital for many years, I am altogether at a disadvantage to humble country herborists, those solitary ramblers who understand a great deal more than I do, a matter I freely admit. What about homeopathy? It has some good qualities and some bad ones. It alleviates the symptoms, sometimes just repressing them without curing the disease. But in grave or acute cases, it is worse than useless. Just like this Maté system, which is totally impotent when it comes to averting a major crisis. True, it can be effective as a stopgap, even staving off less serious attacks altogether. With its blood and lymph purifying properties, anti-scrofular, anti-angioedema, anti-cancers, it sometimes moderates morbid states in which other methods are to no avail. For instance, it permits a patient whose kidneys have been weakened by potassium iodide to gain time and recuperate so that he can safely begin to drink iodine again. I should add that those terrific shooting pains, against which even chloroform and morphine often offer no relief, sometimes surrender as a result of an application of green electricity. If you ask me, though, of what is this liquid electricity constituted, I would have to answer that I haven't a clue. Maté claims that in his globules and fluids, he has managed to capture the electrical properties of certain plants, but he has never explained how it is done, and so he can make up whatever stories about it he likes. Perhaps the most curious aspect of all is that this system, though invented and developed by a Roman Catholic count, is mainly used and discussed by Protestant pastors, whose innate stupidity manifests itself in the unbelievable homilies which accompany their medical writings. All things considered, though such systems are, without exception, utter bunkum, in truth, therapeutics always involves groping around in the dark. Giving some experience and a lot of luck, we sometimes stumble on a new cure without killing too many of our patients first. Well, that's enough of that. Now, what have you been doing with yourself? That's just what I want to ask you about. I haven't seen you for over a week. At the moment, it seems that the world and his uncle have come down with something. I've been running around without stop. I've been attending Chantelouve, by the way, who has had a recurrent attack of gout. He's complaining to me that you never go to see him, and his wife, whom I'm surprised to learn is a great admirer of your books, especially your last novel, has talked to me about nothing else. For a woman who is usually so reserved, Mademoiselle Chantelouve seems to have taken Madame Chantelouve seems to have taken quite a shine to you. Why? What's the matter? He exclaimed, seeing how red D'Artal had become. Oh, nothing. I better be going. I still have some things to do. Good night. Are you feeling all right? Oh, it's nothing, I assure you. Very well, said de Hermy, not wishing to insist. Look at this. He led Durtal into the kitchen and showed him a superb leg of lamb hanging beside the window. I hug it in a draught to put some flavour in it. We'll eat it when Giovanni, the astrologer, dines with us at Carhaix, but as I am the only person in France qualified to boil a gigotte in the English manner, I shall have to get there early to start preparations. Consequently, I won't be able to call for you. You will find me in the tower, in the get-up of a chef. Once outside, Durtal took a long breath. So that was who his mysterious woman was. Chantelouve's wife. No, it couldn't be possible. She had never paid the slightest attention to him. She was always silent and cold. The whole thing was most unlikely. But then, why would she have spoken like that to de Hermy? Surely, if she had wanted to see him, she would have just invited him round. They were acquaintances after all. Why start a pseudonymous correspondence? H. Mobile, he said suddenly. Why, Madame Chantelouve's name is Hyacinthe, a rather boyish name, though suits her well. She lives in the Rue Begnaud, which is not very far from the Rue Littre post office. She is blonde, she has a maid, and she is a devout Catholic. It has to be her. And one after the other, he experienced two totally different sensations. First, disappointment, for he preferred his own fantasy woman. Madame Chantelouve could not live up to the ideal he had fashioned for himself, and for which he longed. The lively, animated, somewhat bizarre features, the agile, animal-like body, the passionate yet melancholic comportment. Moreover, the very fact of knowing the unknown's identity rendered her common and less desirable. The likelihood of success killed the chimera. But he also felt a sense of delight. His mystery woman might have been some hideous old crone, and Hyacinta, as he had already begun to think of her, was extremely attractive. 33 at the outside, not pretty in the ordinary sense, blonde, slightly built and supple, almost without hips, not as skinny as she looked because she was small-boned. Her face might not be the best feature, spoiled as it was by a nose which was too large, but her lips were incandescent, her teeth superb, and her complexion was a delicate shade of milky blue, like cloudy rice water, with just the faintest suggestion of a blush. Her real charm, the source of her enigmatic appeal, resided in her eyes. They were ash-grey and seemed, at first, uncertain, like someone who is short-sighted, conveying an expression of resigned boredom. At certain moments the pupils glowed and sparks of silver twinkled to the surface. By turns they were sorrowful, forsaken, languorous, and haughty. He remembered how those eyes had often unsettled him in the past. In spite of everything, he reflected, there seemed to be little rapport between Madame Chantelouve's physical appearance and those impassioned letters he had received. He had never seen a woman who had such control over her features, nor one less given to display. He remembered the soirees he had attended at the Chantelouves. While contributing little to the conversation, she had been attentive, and she displayed the same degree of polite interests in all her guests. It must be a case of split personality, he decided. She inhabits two different worlds. On one hand, there is Madame Chantelouve, that is shown to the public, the stiff and rather formal hostess, and on the other, there is wild, half-crazed Madame Chantelouve. Romantic, hysterical, a spiritual nymphomaniac. It doesn't make sense. No, he said. I must be on the wrong track. It must just be a coincidence that she mentioned my work today or me. And it's quite a jump from there to the conclusion that she's so head over heels with me that she has taken to writing pseudonymous love letters. But if it isn't her, then who can it be? He continued to ponder the question without getting any nearer a solution. He recalled a memory of her and admitted to himself that she was quite striking, that girlish body of hers, flexible, unhindered by any repugnant layers of fat, mysterious too, with that concentrated air of hers, those plaintive eyes, her very coldness, whether real or affected. He summarised everything he knew about her, which really amounted to nothing more than that she was a widow when she married Chantelouve, and there were no children from her first marriage, and that her previous husband, a manufacturer of chasubles, had, for reasons unknown, killed himself. And that was it. On the other hand, there was no end to the gossip that circulated about Chantelouve. Author of A History of Poland and the Governments of Northern Europe, another history, this time on Boniface VIII and his times, a life of the blessed Jean de Valois, founder of the Annonciade, a biography of the Venerable Mother Anne de Gentonge, founder of the Company of Saint Ursula, and numerous other works of the same ilk, published by Le Coffet, Pam, and Puisselguet, and invariably bound in rough shagreen or some dark leather. Chantelouve was preparing his candidacy for the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles Lettres, hoping for the support of the aristocracy, which was why he opened his house once a week to every sanctimonious hypocrite, provincial bore, and priestling that Paris could offer. It was no doubt a permanent millstone round his neck because, despite his sycophantic manner, he was actually a loquacious fellow who enjoyed a joke. On the other hand, he aspired to be a figure that counted in Parisian literary circles, and expended a good deal of ingenuity in veiling men of letters to stop by his house on a different evening of the week, recruiting them as his aides, or at least preventing them from openly attacking him. Today his name was put forward for election by the clerical party. He had probably contrived those baroque gatherings which, in fact, brought together the most eclectic assortment with the initial intention of attracting and neutralizing his adversaries. But there were other rumours of a less flattering kind, which also circulated. It was said that he was always trying to borrow money, that he lacked scruples, in short, that he was little better than a confidence trickster. Tortal had noticed that, at each of Chantelouve's dinners he had attended, a well-dressed stranger was always present. The gossip being that this guest was a wealthy provincial to whom men of letters were exhibited like a waxwork collection, in consideration for which, either before or afterwards, large sums were borrowed. One thing is certainly undeniable, thought Tortal, and that is that Chantelouve's entertain in some style, yet have no physical income. What's more, Catholic publishing houses and magazines are even worse payers than their secular equivalent. Whatever his reputation in the clerical world, Chantelouve can hardly be making enough from his royalties to cover the standard of living he enjoys. All this needs careful consideration, he reflected. That Madame Chantelouve might be unhappy in her home life, that she might not be in love with that dubious sacristan of a husband of hers, nothing could be more plausible. But what is her role in the household? Is she aware of Chantelouve's financial shenanigans? Still, I don't know why she should have picked on me. If she's in some sort of conspiracy with her husband, she would certainly have had the sense to seek a wealthy or influential lover. And she is perfectly aware that I fulfill neither of these conditions. In fact, Madame Chantelouve cannot but be aware that I could not even keep her in gowns, let alone pay anything towards the upkeep of her private carriage. I make 3,000 a year, more or less, and I don't even manage to keep my own head above the water. That cannot be her game, concluded Tortal, his ardour somewhat abated. Even so, a liaison with a woman like that is not something to be undertaken lightly. What a fool I am, though. All this only goes to prove one thing, that my fair unknown cannot be Chantelouve's wife, and all things considered, that is perhaps just as well. End of chapter.